Good morning. Welcome to Opera House Art's weekly program, Coffee on the Couch. Coffee on the Couch is an opportunity for our community to focus their attention on the life and experience of a celebrated member of our community. We're right on the heels of the beginning of summer, and we are delighted to be joined today by Julia Zell. Julia Zell is a resident of Stonington and also the development director at Island Heritage Trust. And welcome, Julia, to Opera House Arts Coffee on the Couch.
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
So as our audience members, I'll go ahead, Kate.
I'm sorry, Joshua, you go ahead. I'm just excited.
Oh, great. I'm glad you're excited. I'm excited too, and as audience members know, this is a round robin conversation with our guests, so we'll start our conversation with Kate.
Thank you, Joshua. Julia, I met you a few years ago and learned a little bit about your life as an artist. And I read somewhere that you helped your dad when you were 5 years old, taking nails out of wood, and you're not afraid to get your hands dirty. And I'm just curious how that experience at such a young age informed your artistic process, your work as an artist, and what you make.
So I think, so I grew up in Vermont, and my dad was a carpenter, contractor. And when I was 5, my parents decided to raise the roof on our house. So I don't know if you guys know about the Stonington pitch, but there's this unique situation here where the pitch of the roof of many of the old houses here is actually a little bit steeper than your standard pitch, and it actually makes carpentry a little bit more difficult. You can't put it on the standard stops on a saw. But anyway, it's fairly steep. And the house I lived in Vermont was also very steep, and they were raising the roof, changing the pitch to allow for more space in the upstairs. So our whole upstairs was torn apart. I was 5 years old. My dad gave me my very own hammer, taught me how to pull nails out of boards, and said, you get a nickel for every nail or something. It was very exciting. And I'd always been a very energetic kid running around outside, and it sort of played right into this very physical way of expressing myself. I also grew up dancing, and I did ballet for a long time. I was in a professional hip hop dance company when I lived in Boston. And then I even worked carpentry for a year and a half here for Renee Sewell, Tomboy Construction, before working at Island Heritage Trust. So I think that, it's always really translated to how I move through the world and how I experience the world. And in my art, another reason and part of how I got here, I studied sculpture at Massachusetts College of Art and Design in Boston, and I focused on metal and woodwork. So again, a little bit with the carpentry, but I also learned how to blacksmith, how to forge, and weld and fabricate. And the first time I ever came to Deer Isle, I was taking a class with Doug Wilson, who is a beloved blacksmith who lives on Little Deer Isle. And again, just that really physical engagement with how I move through the world and the environment around me. And it's definitely, I think it's pervasive. It's very much a part of my life and how I live it. I don't know, does that answer the question?
Absolutely. And I wonder what I've seen it written in your bio on Island Heritage Trust website that community connection is important to you. So I guess I would continue that question about your art making and how does that take the step towards the community and the greater collective?
Sure. So the sort of physicality aspect or engagement of community.
Yeah.
So for me, even before I worked for Island Heritage Trust, I always loved getting outside on the trails. That feels really physical. That feels really important. And, running into other people there, now as a member or as a staff member of Island Heritage Trust, we also engage the community in workshops. I've joined Martha Bell, who's our environmental educator, who would take the students out onto the trails, and they would be, picking up sticks and building little, whatever. And I think that especially now, when a lot of us have been stuck inside, one of the ways that we are social as humans and the way that we relate to each other is by these physical activities. And I think that many of us are recognizing just how important that is through this time. And, I think back to the memories of being able to gather together, especially with those kids who are so full of energy and remind me so much of myself when I was little. I think providing ways, whether it's dance or acting or going for a walk on a trail, or maybe learning how to go camping and build a fire, or paddle a canoe, those, especially when it's a way to learn and you're coming together and sharing it with other people, I feel like it's such a strong community building opportunity and a way to relate to others and find common ground. And that's always definitely meant a lot to me everywhere, but certainly here. I've gotten to experience it through many different ways, many different venues here. And I love all the opportunities that are afforded folks, particularly here in this place.
Julia, I'm curious about how you first got involved in dance and through what organizations or classes or what have you.
I can't remember exactly so I started ballet when I was 3. And I must say that I can't remember exactly what made me want to, whether it was, watching a performance on TV or the books that I read as a child, or that friends that I had in daycare were doing it. But the thing I do remember is putting on music. I was an only child. I guess this perhaps has some relevance. So I'm by myself in my parents' house, and I would put on, and I loved classical music. Actually, my first CD was a collection of Mozart. But so I'd put on music and I would just dance all over the house, and I had so much energy. I couldn't sit still. They had to give me my own carpet square in kindergarten and said, "This is your personal space. You need to," because I was just running around the room. And so my parents were luckily able to support that. And we had a dance school, Vermont Ballet Theater, that was a couple towns away, and they had ballet lessons starting from 3 or 4. You could start. And I was there for 10 years. I got really into it. Luckily my parents were able to support that for me, and it was close by. And I did ballet for a long time. I mean, it was one of the ways that I dealt with all the energy I had. It certainly developed a community for me. And yeah, it taught me a lot about, you'd have to learn the choreography, right? It really taught me how to memorize things and how to figure out, oh, how does this work? And I really think it, it helped me in other aspects of my life as well growing up. So, yeah.
Julia, growing up in Vermont, I'm wondering, did you always have a sense of where you would live when you grew up? Did you think you would stay in Vermont? Did you think you would get as far away from Vermont as possible? I guess I really just want to know, did you think you would go farther north and end up on an island off the coast of Maine?
Ever since I can remember, I wanted to live on the coast of Maine, actually. Our vacations that we took were the same every year, and it was with friends, very close friends and family. And in the winter, we would go spend a week in Chesuncook, which is on Chesuncook Lake, which is north and west, well, north of Greenville and west of Baxter State Park. And we would have to ski 14 miles into this camp that had no electricity and no running water in the winter. And I loved that. I loved that. And then in the summer, we would stay in some really rustic cabins at the top of Damascotta Lake in the town of Jefferson. And we'd go down into Damascotta, watch the fireworks. Anyway, ever since I can remember, we've been coming to Maine. And actually, my grandmother was born in Orono. My grandfather was an engineering professor at the University of Maine. And my grandmother loved lobster. And she always joked like, oh, you got Mainer in you, you'll end up there. And I always wanted to. And the first time I came here, it was 2011. And I just absolutely fell in love with the place, largely thanks to Doug Wilson. I was here for a haystack class, but he facilitated getting us off campus, and really I had an opportunity to see the community here, beyond just that, beautiful spot, but it is somewhat isolated, and got to see his home and the life that he had created here. And it was just, yep, that's it. And it took me a while to make it back, but years ago I was like, yep, that's the spot for me. So it's about a 7-hour drive back to where my parents are in Vermont, but it's actually almost due west. It's not all that south of here. They're very far north in Vermont. It's a beautiful drive.
I'm so glad you made it back, Julia. What is it about the landscape here, the natural world here that speaks to you?
I love how present it forces you to be. The tides. It's this cycle twice a day, and it really affects. It affects so much. But even if you're not on the water, if you're not a fisherman, but these cycles that what is the tide? Oh, and is probably affects the wind, and is the fog going to come in or out? Is it windy? Is there a storm off the coast? There's just I feel like the weather and the circumstances of the climate here really force you to be present with cycles, with natural cycles. And I really love that. And then also, I love rocks. I've been that kid who walks along the beach and picks up rocks and licks them, because then they look like, how they get all glossy and beautiful as if they were wet. So I was always, I just love rocks, and I love how rugged it is, and I love the coastline. I'd take granite boulders over a sandy beach any day, although we get both a little bit. And the moss and the lichen, just the incredible diversity of, it's really, and actually we have a special forest here that's usually found way up north in the Northwoods of Maine. Because of our climate, we stay a little bit cooler in the summer. We actually stay a little bit warmer in the winter because of the ocean, but it's just it's really special. And I think people feel it, whether they really, consciously identify it or not. I think people really feel it here.
Julia, in working at IHT, is there anything that's, as you've learned more about our natural surroundings here, is there anything that has surprised you?
Oh gosh, I feel like I'm constantly surprised that there's so many. I can't even. I think one of them was that this forest is, because of our certain climate here, we have a forest that's typically only found, north of a certain area in Maine. It also means that at one time, we were home to boreal chickadees, which is not the standard one not the black-capped chickadee. I don't know if you remember this big debate about which chickadee was the state bird, because there's a couple. But that we at one time, because we have this forest here, we were home to these chickadees, and we may still be, I guess. I don't think they've been seen in a while, but that typically only live in the North Woods. And that we really have these sort of special microclimates here. For example, the other day it was totally socked in and kind of cold and windy, fog here in Stonington. And I went to Deer Isle Village and I was sweating. It just in this small shift, even from the west side of the island to the east side of the island, from one of the preserves to another, just how different it can be, and the different little microclimate and ecology that you'll find in one spot versus another it's just magical. It just is, it's like you've got this whole world in, a relatively small area. It's really special.
Julie, I know you are very, very busy with IHT these days, but I'm wondering, when you're not working, how you kind of fill up your well. I don't know if it's, are you still in touch with your art making process, or is it cooking, or how do you nourish yourself when you're not working?
Such a great question. There's many things. I love to read. So I do that. I always love to learn. So, I read a lot of nonfiction these days, but sometimes I love getting lost in a story. I still really love getting outside. I love fly fishing. So I've been doing that as often as I can. The striper are here, striped bass. So that's fun to go explore and see what you can find. I still, even though it's part of my job, I still just want to go for a walk in the woods. That really, if you can give yourself an hour, I think you can feel your shoulders drop, and you can feel the breath that we're so lucky to have. And I never want to lose my gratitude for that. So even if I'm lucky enough for that to be part of my job, it's definitely still part of how I personally fill up my well.
Joshua, you're muted, I think.
Sorry about that. I have a nosy question. Can you give us a picture of what today is looking like for you in terms of what your life is like today?
Sure. Well, 44 North in Stonington has opened back up, which is such a treat. So walk down the hill and put on my mask and get some coffee. I love it. I love that. That feels like such a gift. And letting my chickens out, love that. Can hear them, going crazy all around. They're fat and happy, and always love to go sit outside and just watch them. And certainly work things. It's a big summer for us as an organization. We've had to really pivot, and just like so many folks, I guess our main venue is outside, which is something we're grateful for. We have that freedom to have space, but we've also had to really reevaluate how we do a lot of things. And I am working from home, which is also a gift. But we're still really busy, and we're continuing to keep working on fulfilling our mission and trying to see how we can continue to help the community in the ways that we're able, and keep providing these spaces for people to fill up their wells.
What a wonderful way to wrap up this conversation. Kate, are we near time?
1 minute left. I'll ask one more then. So you mentioned you enjoy reading. You've got that lovely bookshelf behind you. So can I ask you a optional A or B question? A, is there a book you've read recently that you've found particularly compelling? Or B, is there a book right behind you that is a favorite of yours?
Let's see. Oh, this is good.
The Hour of Land.
The Hour of Land by Terry Tempest Williams is it looks at the history of the founding of a lot of our national parks, and it puts it in the context of the time, the politics, the cultural, and the different places that they've existed. And of course Acadia is in here for Mount Desert Island, and it's just the history of land, conservation and public lands for citizens, for all people, is really an interesting one. And I have always loved Terry Tempest Williams as a writer. I think it's really, really fascinating, and she's a beautiful writer. And I've read this twice, and I would read it again.
Great, thank you, Julia.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, Julia. It's good to see you.
You too.
It is good to see you. And this concludes this week's episode of Coffee on the Couch. Julia Zell, our guest today, is the Development Director at Island Heritage Trust, which is a community-based nonprofit land trust contributing to the well-being of the island community by conserving its distinctive landscape and natural resources, maintaining public access to valued trails, shoreline, and islands, and by providing educational programming for all ages. Opera House Arts is an arts organization dedicated to the performing arts, and we believe at the heart of the performing arts is storytelling, and we believe everyone's story matters, and stories nourish us and inspire us. And Julia, certainly today, your stories have nourished us and inspired us. So thank you. And I always like to take a little bit of advice for our audience. They can take it or leave it, but this week's advice is to go get a stone from the beach and lick it. I certainly know I will. So hopefully we'll see you around town, Julia.
I hope so too. Take care.
You too.
You too.